Jason Wilkes, a 32-year-old tourist from the USA, had been traveling through China for several days. He had dreamed of seeing the Great Wall of China since childhood, and now he was finally here, standing among the ancient stones bathed in the glow of the setting sun. The tour group moved forward, but Jason lingered, examining the walls covered in carved symbols. Some looked like simple graffiti left by tourists, but others seemed far too old, as if they had been chiseled into the stone centuries ago. "Hey, are you coming?" someone called from a distance. Jason turned, but the tour group was already gone. Only silence remained, and the endless line of the wall stretching toward the horizon. He pulled out his phone, but the signal was gone. "Damn," he muttered, taking a step forward. And then, something scratched against the wall. At first, softly, then, more insistently. Jason froze as a muffled whisper came from beyond the wall. Jason swallowed and took a deep breath. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey, anyone there?" he shouted, turning in different directions. Silence. He inhaled again and yelled louder. "Guide! I'm lost." For a moment it felt like his voice simply vanished into the dark stones. But then, something answered. A whisper. Soft at first, like a faint breeze sliding along the wall. Then, louder. Words he couldn't understand, spoken just beyond the wall. "Who's there?" Jason's voice wavered. The whisper grew clearer. Now it sounded like multiple voices speaking at once. They chanted words in some ancient tongue he didn't recognize. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the wall. Long, unnatural. Jason stumbled back. Then something slammed against the stones from the other side. A deep, heavy thud, like someone was trying to break through the wall. Bang. He flinched. Bang. Bang. The impacts were getting louder, and then absolute silence. Jason stood frozen, afraid to even breathe. And then, slowly, one of the stones in the wall began to move. A cold shiver ran down Jason's spine. The stone in the wall was slowly shifting, revealing a dark, empty space beyond. A frigid, stale air drifted out, like the entrance to an ancient, long-forgotten tomb had just been opened. Instinctively, he pressed his hands against the stone, trying to stop it from moving. No. Screw this, he exhaled, straining with all his might. The stone was unbelievably heavy, but it moved as if something inside was pushing it back. The whispering beyond the wall grew louder. Now it was distinct voices, several voices, speaking in a language he couldn't understand, filled with hissing and guttural sounds. Bang! Jason flinched. Something had slammed against the stone from the other side. He gritted his teeth, shoving it back into place. But then, cold, bony fingers slipped through the gap and grabbed his wrist. Jason screamed and yanked himself back, tearing away from the grip. His fingers went numb from the touch. It was as if he had been grasped by ancient, deathly evil itself. The wall trembled, but the stone was slowly settling back in place. The whispering turned into angry hissing, filled with malice. One final thud, and then silence. The stone remained in place. Jason gasped for breath, clutching his wrist, which was now red and frozen to the touch. He had just sealed something away, but it knew he was here. From behind him, heavy footsteps echoed. Someone was walking along the wall toward him. Jason held his frozen fingers against his chest. The icy touch of those dead fingers that had tried to claw their way out of the wall still lingered on his skin. But now his focus was on the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate thuds against the stone. 1, 2, 3. Someone was walking along the Great Wall. The fog thickened. Jason could barely make out the outlines of the stones around him. He took a deep breath and, forcing down his fear, turned around. A shadow emerged from the swirling mist. At first, just a silhouette. Tall, broad, with flowing sleeves that moved with the faint breeze. A step forward. The figure stepped out of the fog. Standing before him was an ancient warrior. Jason's eyes widened. The warrior's face was hidden behind an old Chinese battle helmet, decorated with intricate dragon engravings. His armor was weathered and worn, rust staining the plates, tattered fabric strips hanging loosely from his belt. But the most terrifying part, there were no eyes. Behind the slits in the helmet, there was only blackness, with faint, eerie lights flickering inside. "Oh my God," Jason whispered, stumbling backward. But the warrior did not move. He simply stood there, staring at Jason despite having no eyes. Then, the whispering returned, but this time, it was inside Jason's head. "You have freed them." "What?" he gasped. "You broke the seal. Now they are coming." "Who? Who is coming?" The warrior did not answer. He only lifted his heavy arm and pointed behind Jason, toward the wall where Jason had just sealed the stone. Jason turned, and his heart stopped. Where the wall had been, there was now a wide opening, and something inside was beginning to crawl out. Jason spun around and ran. His feet slipped against the cold stone. His heart pounded wildly. He had no idea where he was going. He just needed to get away from this place. Behind him, the whispers turned into screams, but these were not human screams. They were the voices of something that should not exist. He could hear heavy breathing coming from the hole in the wall, claws tapping against the stone. They were coming out. Jason glanced over his shoulder while running and saw movement in the fog. First, pale hands with elongated fingers, scratching against the ground. Then, twisted faces burnt and hollow with gaping holes where eyes should be. The creatures were climbing out, pulling themselves onto the stone, their heads jerking toward him as if they could smell his fear. "Oh God," he gasped, speeding up. The fog thickened, and suddenly, the wall ended. He skidded to a stop at the edge of an ancient, crumbling staircase leading downward into the darkness. On one side, a steep drop. On the other, shadows closing in. And then, footsteps. Something was chasing him. Jason didn't think. He just ran. He threw himself onto the rotting staircase, which spiraled downward into the darkness, and began racing down, leaping over crumbling steps. Stones crumbled beneath his feet, the abyss below bottomless. Behind him, the creatures screamed. They were climbing the wall, scrambling after him, their shadows stretching unnaturally in the moonlight. One wrong step. Jason felt his foot slip, crack. The staircase collapsed beneath him. He plummeted, slamming against jagged stones, rolling into the void. The world spun. Pain shot through his body, the air ripped from his lungs. The last thing he heard was the shriek of the creatures and a whisper inside his mind. "You cannot escape." "No." His scream vanished into the abyss. Darkness. Jason woke up. Silence. Absolute, dead silence. He lay on his back, feeling the cold stone beneath him. A faint light filtered through the mist. With shaking hands, he sat up, looked around. He was back on the Great Wall of China. No staircase, no monsters, no signs of struggle. Only the empty road stretching ahead and behind him, as if none of it had ever happened. But his wrist, where that hand had grabbed him, there were bruises in the shape of long, bony fingers. Jason held his breath. Behind him, a sound echoed softly, a whisper. Jason jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. The silence pressed in on his ears, but then, voices in the distance. He looked around. Everything seemed normal. No staircase, no creatures. Just the ordinary Great Wall of China, stretching into the horizon. Jason rubbed his face with a shaking hand and took a few steps forward. Around the next bend, he saw a group of tourists. His group. People were laughing, taking photos, listening to the tour guide talk about the Ming Dynasty. This was impossible. "Hey!" Jason shouted, running up to them. A few people turned around. "Dude, where were you?" someone asked. "You were gone for like 15 minutes, another added. "We looked for you, but I guess you just wandered off the path." 15 minutes? Jason froze. He remembered hours of horror, He had run, fallen, seen shadows, heard their voices. It couldn't have been just 15 minutes. He touched his wrist. The bruises were still there. I guess Jason had no words. Something shifted in the mist behind him. He spun around. Nothing. But deep down he knew. This place is a trap, like the Bermuda Triangle, but on the Great Wall of China. And it had taken people before, and it would take more. It had been 5 years since Jason Wilkes visited the Great Wall of China. He returned home to the USA, but he could never truly leave that place behind. Each year, his thoughts drifted back to those 15 minutes that, for him, had lasted an eternity. He tried to forget, but he couldn't. So he did the only thing he could. He became a professor of Chinese history. Now, Jason is a professor at the Aspen University of Historical Studies, located at 301 Shadow Lane, Boulder, Colorado, 80302, USA. His course is one of the most popular. Every year, hundreds of students enroll in his lectures about ancient China, especially about the Great Wall. He speaks of dynasties, wars, builders, and legends, but never of what he lived through himself. He never speaks of the whispers in the mist, of the warrior with empty eyes, of the hand reaching through the stone. But sometimes, when the classroom falls silent, he pauses, and he catches himself staring out the window, where in the reflection of the glass, he thinks he sees a shadow standing in the hallway. He blinks, and there's nothing, but he knows. They know where he is, and they are waiting. The end.